Good evening to the esteemed panelists, members of the HSR Toastmasters Club, and all the lovely guests. Today, we are going to talk about the elephant in the room, gender role. A social role encompassing a range of behaviors and attitudes that are generally considered acceptable, appropriate, or desirable for a person based on that person's biological or perceived sex. Gender roles influence a wide range of human behavior, often including the clothing a person chooses, the profession a person pursues, and the personal relationships a person enters. Today, we have with us four profound experts as our panelists who will bring in a unique perspective and will help us better understand the impact of gender roles in our society. To begin with, I would first like to introduce each of our panelists. Our first panelist is Ms. Sutapa Sanyar. She is a consultant, advisor, trainer, and speaker on leadership, gender and diversity, social inclusion, and public policy. She was the first women Indian police officer to serve as Director General of Police in UP and is the recipient of the Police Medal for Distinguished Services from the Honorable President of India. With over 3 decades of demonstrated leadership experience in managing cross-functional teams and acumen in public administration, Ms. Sanyal has designed and implemented several innovative programs for social inclusion and gender equality, and has been widely lauded as a champion of women and child empowerment. Our second panelist for today is Mr. Rakesh Ganguly. He's a senior development practitioner working at the intersection of gender, equity, and livelihoods. He has worked with various organizations in India for the past 20 years on issues of poverty, livelihoods, disaster management, and gender mainstreaming. He holds a master's degree in social work from the Tata Institute of Social Sciences, Mumbai. Rakesh is currently engaged as a senior gender consultant with the United Nations Development Program, Independent Evaluation Office, New York, United Nations Women Multi-Country Office, India, and Palladium Consulting India Private Limited. Next, our third panelist is Ms. Neetu Taj. She works as education specialist at SAP, a diversity and inclusion lead focused on gender equality and a strong LGBTQ ally. She launched the Business Women's Network at one of the verticals in India in 2019 to empower women and is now driving a career development program for women in workforce at an Asia Pacific level to help change the career perspectives of women of this region. She's a trainer by profession with more than a decade of experience across culture, countries, and all age groups. Our final panelist for today is Mr. Vivek Shah. He's a vice president at Goldman Sachs and an inclusion and diversity ally. He was awarded with the Equity Equalizer Award in 2020 for his contributions towards diversity and inclusion. He's also a Toastmaster, a 5 times Triple Crown awardee, Coronation 2021 Program Chair, and the Club Extension Chair 2021, and is one of the most reputed names in the Toastmasters fraternity. Thank you to all the panelists for being a part of this panel discussion today. I welcome you all to this discussion. And we at HSR Toastmasters Club are truly honored that you have spared some time today to embrace and participate in this discussion. I would also like to inform that we will have a question and answer session from the audience at the end of the panel discussion, where you all can ask questions to our esteemed panelists. So let's start our discussion today with this question. And this is for each one of the panelists. How do you think gender roles are constructed, especially when we talk about Indian society? Ms. Sutapa, you have been involved and have worked closely with the people on the ground for about 3 decades. Would you like to share your perspective on this question?
Sure. Thank you so much for having me today on the panel. And of course, yeah, we live in suboptimal and sub-ideal worlds. So, and you know, there can't be one solid reason for the question that you asked. My sense is part of it is historical. You know, those days when man went hunting and the woman was at home to look after the children and the housekeeping part of it, the homemaking part of it. It is partly reinforced by the socio-cultural narratives, like, you know, victim blaming, culture of silence, and these design the stereotypes, and they fix the gender norms and the gender roles and the gender discrimination. And of course, they lead to a lot of gender-based violence also. This is continued, you know, nicely because of the psychological comfort which people experience by accepting whatever is being handed down to them and not challenging the status quo and not stepping out of their comfort zone. It is also enabled and empowered by the controlled access to assets by women, that is the economic side. And I would say lastly, sealed tight by the lack of particular genders to you know, having access to the justice delivery system, which means the legal aspect also. Yeah.
Very interesting insight. I mean, you just mentioned that it's rooted in our history, and sometimes it has also been transformed into the blame game or the victim mentality. Rakesh, would you like to follow up on this?
Yeah, thank you. I'm very happy to be on this distinguished panel and with such an interesting audience. Just to build upon what Sutapa ji has already shared, I think some of the things that one needs to sort of also look at is that gender roles are essentially non-binary. So a lot of times our conceptualization of gender is only about men and women. So we also need to understand that gender is also intersects with multiple other identities and factors such as caste, class, age, sexuality, religion, disability, etc. Yeah, and these factors and these kind of identities intersect with gender, and then they also determine what kind of gender roles, you know, individuals would play and what kind of status they would enjoy in society as men, women, or, you know, non-binary sort of individuals. And therefore there's a need to first of all understand gender from an intersectional lens. Yeah, that is one. The second response is that from your question itself, the way you have framed it, I think the term constructed is very, very critical. I think that is the operative in this particular question. And as Tapaji has already shared, that there are gender norms that are accepted, practiced, and therefore perpetuated over generations, okay, in any given society. And this is very, sort of like a peculiar characteristic of that particular society. And we will see that, how does it sort of manifest. We heard, very often that our women don't do this, our girls don't do this, hamari ladkiyan ye nahi karti, our men don't do this. But it is more frequently, applied to girls and women than, men and boys. Yeah, that is something that we see. And transgender persons are kind of ostracized, and therefore they remain outside of this normative structure. Okay, that is the second response. And therefore, one needs to understand that, what can be constructed, can also be deconstructed. So gender can be, the idea of gender can also be deconstructed. If you talk about the Indian society, it is a polylith. Okay, so what might be acceptable or appropriate in a particular context, in a certain community will be completely unacceptable in others. Let me give an example. For example, you look at, the covering of the head. So in some societies, it is very important that you cover your head, you also cover your face. I mean, women especially are expected to. And in some other communities, you see it is completely, doesn't have any value whatsoever. So, when you talk about Indian society, there is no one formula of how you address it. I think there are different kinds of realities, and one has to have a very sort of tailored response, to each of these inequities, I would say. That's it.
Yeah, very true. I mean, and one of the things which was very powerful, which you just shared, that just like the roles are being constructed, they can also be deconstructed. Very powerful insight. So Neetu, would you like to weigh in on what Rakesh just mentioned?
First of all, definitely, but thank you so much for having me on. But I am privileged to be and honored to be on this panel. So the only thing that I'd like to add to what Ms. Sutapa and Mr. Rakesh has mentioned is the fact that when we come to look at gender roles, I love the fact that Mr. Rakesh has brought in the LGBT aspect to it as well. If you look into history, which forms these roles throughout the evolution of mankind, literally, right? If we look into our cultural history also, LGBTQ community existed back then as well. And these gender roles and its responsibilities existed back from those eras as well. So as we modernized and when we were shedding a few of these constraints around the roles and things like that, we lost the essence of inclusivity as well in these norms and trying to make things a little more comfortable around our day-to-day lifestyles and things like that. And like ma'am mentioned, trying to adapt to the norms and the culture of silence. Like we lost the essence of inclusivity, and I strongly feel today we are trying to bring that back in a very modern concept. So that's the only bit I would like to add, and it comes from the culture. It exists. We just need to look back into history and adapt it in a much more modernized way.
Yes, definitely, Neetu. So Vivek, Neetu just shared that somewhere we have lost the inclusion perspective because of whatever gender roles have been constructed for since so many years. So do you want to elaborate more on that?
Sure. I mean, obviously, as times have moved and changed, we have, if you look on a liberal scale, if you take it from that perspective, we have flowed and ebbed over time. And a lot of it has to also do with language, how language has changed. And it really struck me when we started off with the theme of the day, because there is an idiom, and I'm sure the grammarians picked up his ears at this point, wear the pants in the house, which was basically the construction of a gender role, which said that men's fashion at that time involved men wearing pants and women wearing skirts, frocks, and hence man of the house was the guy who would run the house. And that is in the language itself. So that reinforces and perpetuates that construction, that gender roles, that this is what is expected. This is what the education system in the traditional sense re-imbibes that message throughout. And whenever we have seen a change in education, have we seen a change in the thought process? And these are all subtle things that I feel that all of us just need to be careful about, because these are the things that actually reinforce stereotypes. And we always wonder that, how do children, for example, end up assuming things even when we try really hard, that they don't make those assumptions.
Excellent insight, Vivek. You told that language perpetuates gender stereotypes, or it really constructs the gender roles itself. Like when we say that, oh, this is only girls should do, this is not what a boy should do, or this is not a profession which a boy should go for. So the language itself is such that, yes, these gender roles are perpetuated, definitely. So we have got some interesting takes on what are gender roles and how are they constructed, especially when we talk about our society. So it's time to let's just move on ahead and dig deeper on this topic. So despite gains in gender equality, there have been a lot of progress, but still ingrained biases about males and females, they are very much prevalent. So there are some specific attributes that are associated with men and women. For example, just like how Vivek mentioned, that women are supposed to be polite, accommodating, nurturing, and men are expected to be strong, aggressive, bold, and they're expected not to cry. And let's say if a man does express his feelings, or let's say if a man becomes sensitive, So they often do get mocked by statements like, stop being a girl, what happened to you? So how do you think these kinds of gender stereotypes, that even an emotion is fixed whether it should be felt by a man or it should be felt by a woman, how do you think these kinds of stereotypes impact people? We would like to hear your perspectives and dig a little deeper on this topic. Mr. Rakesh, you have been involved as a gender consultant and you have been working on the ground for so many years. So would you like to share your experience here?
So it's a very interesting kind of question, and just to reflect on that idea is of stereotyping gender. So a couple of things. One is that, see, gender behavior is kind of coded, and this coding starts from birth and lasts until death. Yeah? So each person knows what is to be done, society knows what is to be expected, etc., and everybody is performing a sort of role. Okay, and what we call might be like a jargon, but what we call it as the socialization of gender, of how you make this gender role more universal within that given context. And where does this happen? It happens within families, it happens within communities, neighborhoods, schools, workplaces, public and private institutions, all across. So everybody follows a certain code. Okay, and it deeply affects people's lives and livelihoods and their choices. So what education one would get, what kind of specialization one would pursue, what kind of art form one can pursue, what careers one can take up, okay, is all determined by this socialization of gender. Okay, so far as even the matters of love, desire, marriage, practically all relations are influenced by the socialization of gender, and this has a deep impact on people's lives. Even today it is hard for people to imagine, say for instance, women as farmers. Like when we do a lot of these workshops and meetings with different kinds of stakeholders, we instantly see that it is very difficult even at the policy level for people to imagine women as farmers, or for men to choose nursing perhaps as a profession, or to imagine maybe stay-at-home fathers, taking care of their children or the household full time. And when it comes to transgenders, of course, because they are outrightly and vehemently kind of rejected, they don't fit into this rigid compartment of man, woman, and stereotyping of their behavior or their code. So they've historically remained outside of what we know and experience as the mainstream. Yeah, so stereotyping, is rampant. It is very, very deep rooted. Okay, and it plays out in so many different ways. Sometimes it is visible, sometimes it is invisible, and it is kind of accepted, all across.
Definitely, it's not just in the kind of emotions felt by people. It has also perpetuated into the kind of careers, or what should a woman do, what should a woman not do. These kind of things have also come into picture. Ms. Sutapa, would you like to elaborate more on this?
Yeah, sure. That's a very deep question, and I feel that these stereotypings, they arise out of course, the social narratives, etc., but they also arise out of the unconscious biases which we carry. The implicit biases, those kind of blind spots in our brains. And this labeling is one of the outcomes of it. So as long as you are labeling somebody, and as long as you have stereotypical ideas and you put it inside a box and put the lid tightly on it, it's fine. Right? The problem arises when that lid opens and these ideas come out, and especially if you are in a position to take a decision. Right? See, like the recruiter in an organization, if the unconscious gender bias comes out, then there's a whole difference in who will be recruited. The police personnel at the police station, if a woman comes and says that I've been victimized, and that those unconscious biases start working, those stereotypical ideas start working, then it amounts to victim blaming, not registering the FIR, kind of minimizing whatever she is saying, that kind of stuff. So labeling it hurts everybody. It hurts the man also, it hurts the woman also, the boy and the girl also. You spoke of अरे क्या चूड़ी पहन के बैठा है types and क्यों रोता है लड़की जैसा. These are very, very, these have deep psychological impacts. Why? And I feel these are more of personality issues, emotional issues than gender or sex related issues. Why do we presume that a man cannot have soft emotions? It's wrong to presume all these things. And remember that ad which used to happen a long time back when that boy was taunted in the way in which you just now described, and he grows up to be a very, very violent man. So whenever the time comes, those emotions will come out, those bottled up emotions will come out. So parents also have to be very, very careful about what messages they are giving to the girl and the boy, right? Because such people, who are bottled up, who are labeled, who don't express their emotions when they should, I mean, at the right time, they themselves live suboptimal lives, and they do not know how to give space or how to give respect to the people around them. In our case, it becomes the women in his life.
Very true, very true. I mean, it's not just that they will gender roles have a sociological impact. It's also the psychological impact. It interferes with the mental well-being of a person, and that is why sometimes it's so dangerous to when these stereotypes come into the picture. So Neetu, what's your take on this?
Um, since I've been a person in this society, in this culture, who's lived abroad and here, and have been able to see these gender biases from or any kind of unconscious bias from a very different lens, thanks to cultural exposure. One of the things that I very strongly preach is psychological or emotional hygiene. Now, this is a concept that has come through with Guy Winch, and he's one of my favorite psychologists around the world. Now, emotional hygiene is not something that's practiced, like ma'am mentioned. It's not something that's practiced in the society at all. Boundaries are not something that is understood in our culture. Our Indian culture does not understand the concepts of boundaries. Absolutely. I do not blame the culture. Please understand, I come from a place of empathy here. And these concepts have to be taught at the parenting level today for the future. But we also we cannot blame the history anymore. We have to take responsibilities on it and accept that we have a lot of learning, like sir mentioned, deconstruction to do ourselves, and take up the responsibility on that. Having said that, I grew up in the society. Lucky for me, I had family that didn't have this kind of stereotyping to a very large extent. But when I went out into the world after growing up and pursuing my culture, pursuing my education, I was very strongly stereotyped in a lot of concepts of dressing, hairstyle. But I also saw my male friends or transgender friends facing these issues as well, but they had their own burdens to carry. Right? So empathizing with each other is something we really have to come forward with. It's not just a jhanda chadao, and it's not just like you bear a flag of a gender. You don't, not really. There is a concept of empathizing with that. So how does this affect? I'm a mother to a daughter, and today when I teach my child that there is no gender to any profession. It's your passion that can carry you forward. You can be anything that you want to be, just be a compassionate human being. When I preach this to her or practice this with her, she goes out into the society and comes back with, again, an unlearning process. So this cycle is pretty strong for us today. We teach something, send them out, they come back with the questions, and then we have to start the whole cycle all over again. If we do not understand these concepts very strongly and we do not imbibe them as adults today, we will not be able to break these pain points. We are able to do it today because we were victims of it, and we know it doesn't function anymore. So that's my take on it, but that comes from practicing emotional hygiene. There is no gender to emotional hygienity at all. So my take is definitely that's where it should start.
Thank you, Neetu, for sharing your personal experiences about how you were really impacted by gender stereotypes. And it's not just about the gender thing, but yes, we can only change what we have control over right now. So yeah, we have to take responsibility, and we have to take responsibility to change to bring the change in the society. So thank you very much. So we are running short of time. So in the interest of time, I would just quickly ask the last question, and then we can conclude our discussion. So in the last century, as we can see that significant progress it has been made in advancing gender equity in India, right? So more girls are going to school, more women are serving in parliament or in positions of leadership. We have also seen that fathers have become more involved parents, and the laws are being reformed also to advance the gender equality. But despite these changes, many challenges still remain, which brings me to this final question. And I would like all the panelists to quickly, in the interest of time, answer it very, very briefly. So if each one of you could share what are the steps which we can take to fight the gender stereotypes, that would be wonderful. Vivek, we would like to start with you on this.
I mean, I would say step one is acknowledge the fact that we have biases and acknowledges the biases that we have and celebrate everyone as an individual. I think if you start off with these small steps, each one of us making that difference will help the whole world change.
Definitely, definitely. So Neetu, would you like to follow up on that?
Definitely, something that I practice and I preach in my Business Owners Network is there's a test of Harvard. If any of you would like to go and take it, it's an unconscious bias test, and it covers almost all the unconscious biases. So please don't go one after the other. Take breaks between them and be self-aware. And I think half the job is done if you're self-aware, and the rest will fall in place if you're a little empathetic and compassionate to yourself and others.
Yes, yes. Ms. Sutapa, would you like to share what other steps maybe at the ground level can be taken to overcome the gender stereotypes?
Well, there will be self-awareness. First, you have to admit you come out of that denial zone, right? I'll give you a small incident. I was in one of those Indigo flights, right? I have been working on women's issues, gender issues, diversity and inclusion. Now, when they announced, this was years back when they had started the all-female flights, that captain so-and-so and co-pilot so-and-so. For a moment, I was shaken. Okay, so it's all women today. And then, I gave myself a mental slap and I told me, what am I thinking? So we have to become aware. We shouldn't say that, okay, I don't have any gender bias or I don't have any of these implicit biases. All of us have it. Unconscious biases, definitely. Conscious biases, they are even worse. So you have to control that. So self-awareness. And then, once you're aware yourself, you spread this awareness through allyship, through like-minded people working together.
Definitely. I mean, before going ahead and changing the society, I think we should start with ourselves and we should challenge ourselves whenever we encounter such kind of bias. Definitely. Very, very interesting experience. Rakesh, would you like to wrap up with what do you think can be done to address this aspect?
Yeah, thank you. So there are several things, but the top three that I can think of right now at this point, very simple, that I also sort of feel is very critical. One is to share household work. I think when you get into hands-on work, I think that is a big equalizer, number one. Number two is at workplaces. So we see that there's a growing awareness, like several panelists have said, and you have acknowledged in your opening remarks, is that there's a greater acknowledgement and awareness about gender disparity at workplaces, and we have very nicely worded policies. But there is lack of accountability. So I would say creating and implementing appropriate gender inclusive policies, and more importantly, to make them accountable, right? Otherwise they don't work. And the final thing is about media, because that has a huge influence over, across age groups and cultures, is to have appropriate representation of both men and women, girls and boys, and identify them as non-binary and not objectifying them or perpetuating these kind of stereotypes. So these three, I would say, would be most critical.
Thank you so much, Rakesh, for making accountability also come into the picture here. So very interesting solutions. At least I can start with myself. I can't talk much about the society, but I think the change begins with me. Thank you all for sharing your thoughts. Now let's take a few minutes, and here probably I will only be able to take just one question from our audience. So anybody from the audience, please raise your hands if you have any questions for our panelists. Please go ahead. Yes, Hemant, please go ahead.
Yeah, so in the entire panel discussion, we had this topic that somewhere history has made the issue of gender inequality. But do you think that our misunderstanding of our culture or our history also has some impact on this? For example, in many of our cultures in India, we have this concept of goddesses. We preach goddesses. And at the same time, there's such discrimination against women. Do you think that the misunderstanding of our culture also contributes to gender inequality?
Ms. Sutapa, would you like to answer that?
Yeah, see, gods and goddesses came much later on. When I spoke of historical, I was speaking of those times when men went hunting, the agrarian societies, right? But then, of course, we can, of course, break away from history. But then, most of the panelists have also spoken of the other reinforcing things. In such social issues, it cannot be a linear thing, there will be all kinds of lateral forces also. So it's not a homogeneous thing that because of history, but because of so many things: social, psychological, cultural, legal, economic. So everything together has created this mess which we are in, right?
Thank you so much, Ms. Sutapa, and I hope Hemant, she's able to answer your question. So yeah, we are really running short of time. So thank you so much. We appreciate so much each one of you for thinking deeply about the impact of gender roles in society and for thinking about the opportunities which we have to fight gender stereotypes. We are really, really grateful to our panelists who took out some time today and made such a valuable contribution towards making this panel discussion so insightful and enriching. I really thank you from the bottom of my heart. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all of you. Thanks, Kavita. Thanks all of you.
Thank you.
Over to our MOC.